I'm Maria, 32 female. I live in a quiet apartment filled with books and historical maps, a peaceful sanctuary from my work as a city archivist. My life is orderly and calm, centered around preserving the past, which is perhaps why my family's disregard for it has always been so jarring. For years, I was the reliable, invisible daughter, while my younger sister, Sophia, was the star, and I was mostly okay with that until they tried to rewrite the one part of my history that mattered most. A promise from my grandmother. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My grandmother, Beatrice, was my anchor. While my mother, Helen, was always busy with her interior design clients, fussing over color palettes and fabric swatches, and my sister Sophia was cultivating her online persona, Grandma B was the one who saw me. She smelled of lavender and old paper, a comforting scent that filled her sun-drenched study where she'd taught me how to mend the spines of old books. She understood my love for history, for tangible connections to the people who came before us. My mother called it a dusty hobby. Grandma B called it honoring our roots. The ring was the ultimate symbol of that connection. It wasn't a massive diamond or a flashy piece of jewelry. It was a delicate, vintage gold ring with a small sapphire, the color of a twilight sky, surrounded by tiny, seed pearl flowers. It was my great-great-grandmother's engagement ring, passed down through the generations. It wasn't about its monetary value, but its story. Each woman who wore it had added a chapter to its history. Grandma B would let me wear it sometimes when I visited. Its cool weight a comforting presence on my finger. The promise was made on my 16th birthday. We were in her garden, surrounded by fragrant rose bushes. She took my hand and her grip, though frail, was firm. "Maria," she'd said, her voice soft but clear, "this ring belongs with someone who understands its story. It's not just a pretty thing, it's our family's heart. It skips a generation to find the right soul. It was mine, and one day it will be yours. I want you to have it when you find someone who treasures you as much as you will treasure this." It was a sacred moment, a promise whispered between just the two of us. It was a confirmation that I was seen, that my quiet passions were valued. After she passed away 5 years ago, the ring went to my mother for safekeeping, with the understanding that it was earmarked for me. I never spoke of it, assuming the promise was a known fact, a settled piece of our family's future history. My mother never corrected that assumption. Whenever family heirlooms were discussed, she would vaguely say the ring was for the next generation, and I always thought she meant me. Sophia, my sister, is my opposite in every conceivable way. Where I find comfort in silence and history, she thrives on attention and the fleeting trends of the present. Her life is a carefully curated gallery of perfect moments, broadcast to tens of thousands of followers. She's beautiful, charismatic, and knows how to give our mother exactly what she wants. A daughter who reflects well on her, a daughter who sparkles. I, on the other hand, was the sensible, quiet one. The background character. The lead-up to Sophia's engagement was a whirlwind of planning and excitement, orchestrated by our mother. Helen saw Sophia's fiancé, a wealthy tech investor named Julian, as the ultimate social prize. Their engagement party was to be a grand affair at a lavish downtown hotel, a testament to my mother's impeccable taste and my sister's successful brand. I tried to be happy for her, I truly did. I helped address invitations and offered to put together a slideshow of their photos, a task I thought would be a nice, personal touch. Sophia had laughed and said, "Oh, that's sweet, but my content team is handling all the visuals. We need it to be on brand." A week before the party, my mother called me. Her voice was unusually brisk. "Maria, darling, I need you to go through your grandmother's old photo albums. We need some vintage shots for the party's decor. Find a few of Beatrice as a young woman, something elegant." I agreed, of course. Going through Grandma B's things was a bittersweet comfort. As I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by leather-bound albums, I came across a photo of her on her own wedding day. She was radiant, and on her finger was the sapphire ring. A wave of love and anticipation washed over me. I imagined the day the ring would be mine, a tangible link to the woman who had understood me so completely. The promise felt as real and solid as the photograph in my hands. It was just a matter of time. Little did I know, time was running out. The engagement party was exactly as I'd expected, a sea of champagne glasses, air kisses, and professionally managed aesthetics. My mother, Helen, was in her element, gliding through the crowd in a designer gown, her face a mask of serene pride. Sophia and Julian were the glowing centerpiece, posing for a professional photographer who followed them like a shadow. I found a quiet corner near the string quartet, feeling more like a spectator than a family member. I'd worn a simple navy dress, something I felt comfortable in, but next to the sequins and silks of the other guests, I felt plain, like an unadorned page in a book of illuminated manuscripts. My great-aunt Teresa, Grandma B's younger sister, found me there. Teresa was a retired librarian, a woman with the same quiet wisdom as my grandmother. Her eyes, magnified by her glasses, held a familiar warmth. "You look a little lost, dear," she said, handing me a glass of water. "These things can be overwhelming." "Just a bit," I admitted. "It's all very, Sophia." Teresa chuckled softly. "That it is. Your grandmother would have found it all rather loud, but she would have been proud of both her granddaughters." Her words were a small comfort, a reminder of a time when my place in the family felt secure. About an hour into the festivities, my mother tapped a glass for attention. The room fell silent, and a spotlight found her standing on a small stage. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Sophia and Julian," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "As a mother, you dream of moments like this. Seeing my daughter so happy with a wonderful man is a gift." She smiled, a perfect, polished smile. "And in our family, we have a tradition of marking these momentous occasions with something truly special. An heirloom that connects the past to the future." My heart began to beat faster. This was it. She was going to talk about the ring. I felt a strange mix of anxiety and excitement. It seemed like an odd time to bring it up, as it was promised to me, but maybe she was going to tell the story of the ring as a tribute to Grandma B before officially announcing Sophia's engagement. Helen continued, her eyes glistening under the lights. "Our family's most precious heirloom is my mother's ring, the Beaumont sapphire. It has been passed down through generations, always finding its way to a woman of strength, beauty, and grace." She paused for dramatic effect, her gaze sweeping the room before landing squarely on Sophia. "And tonight, I can think of no one more deserving to carry on that tradition than my beautiful daughter, Sophia." The air left my lungs. It felt like a physical blow. The room began to spin, the faces of the guests blurring into a confused-looking mass. I watched, frozen, as my mother pulled a small, dark blue velvet box from her purse. It was the original box, the one I remembered from my grandmother's jewelry drawer. She opened it, and even from across the room, I could see the deep blue of the sapphire winking in the light. "Sophia, my darling, come here," Helen called. Sophia, looking genuinely surprised and delighted, walked to the stage. She feigned shock perfectly, a hand flying to her mouth as her eyes welled with tears for the cameras. The crowd murmured its approval. Julian beamed, putting his arm around her. "This ring was your grandmother's," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion as she slipped it onto Sophia's finger. "And now, it's yours. May it bring you a lifetime of happiness." The room erupted in applause. I stood motionless, my hands clenched at my sides. The sound was deafening, a wave of noise that crashed over me, drowning me in a cold, numbing shock. I felt hundreds of eyes on me. People knew I was the other granddaughter. They must have known the stories, the traditions. Their polite applause felt like a judgment. I could feel the pitying glances, the whispers starting at the edges of the room. It was a public declaration. I was not the granddaughter of strength, beauty, and grace. I was the one who was passed over. Sophia held up her hand, showing off the ring to the photographer. The sapphire that was promised to me was now a prop in her perfectly curated life. My mother joined them for a photo, the three of them a perfect picture of family joy, while I stood alone in the shadows, my own family history being erased before my very eyes. The humiliation was a sharp, physical pain in my chest. It wasn't about the ring itself anymore. It was about the promise. A promise made by the one person who had always made me feel seen, now publicly broken by the two people who had only ever made me feel invisible. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, the sound of their laughter echoing behind me. The velvet box in my memory was now empty, just like the promise I had cherished for 16 years. The days following the engagement party were a blur of hollowed-out silence. My mother and sister must have known I'd left abruptly, but neither of them their silence was its own statement, a confirmation that my feelings were irrelevant, an inconvenient footnote to Sophia's perfect moment. I went to work, cataloging century-old city records and digitizing fragile documents, my hands moving with practiced precision while my mind replayed the scene at the party over and over. The spotlight, my mother's triumphant voice, Sophia's curated surprise, the sapphire flashing on her finger. Each memory was a fresh stab of betrayal. I felt haunted by my grandmother's memory. Had I misunderstood her all those years ago? Was the promise just a sentimental whim of an old woman, something I had magnified in my own mind? Doubt began to creep in, a cold and insidious vine wrapping around the warmth of my memories. Maybe my mother was right. Maybe the ring was always meant for the daughter who shone brightest. The thought was a bitter pill to swallow. It meant that my grandmother, my anchor, had seen me the same way everyone else did, as secondary. A week after the party, a small, padded envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was from my great-aunt Teresa. Inside, there was no card, just a small, antique skeleton key. I recognized it immediately. It was the key to my grandmother's old writing desk, a beautiful mahogany piece that my mother had kept in storage after her passing. Helen had deemed it too old-fashioned for her modern home aesthetic. A sticky note was attached to the key, with Teresa's neat, librarian's handwriting. Beatrice always said the most important things are written down. Maybe you should check her desk. A flicker of something, not quite hope, but curiosity ignited within me. The desk was in the climate-controlled storage unit my mother kept for her overflow of furniture and design samples. I called her, my voice carefully neutral. "Mom, I was thinking of getting a new desk for my apartment. Do you mind if I take a look at Grandma B.'s to see if it would fit?" There was a pause. "That old thing," she said, her voice dismissive. "It's huge, Maria, and so dark, it won't match your aesthetic at all." "I'd just like to see it," I insisted. "It has sentimental value." She sighed, a sound of weary impatience. "Fine, I'll text you the code to the unit, just don't make a mess." The storage unit was packed to the ceiling with shrink-wrapped chairs and rolls of expensive wallpaper. In the back, under a dusty canvas drop cloth, was the desk. It was just as I remembered it. Solid, elegant, and filled with secret compartments my grandmother had shown me as a child. My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked the main roll top with the key from Teresa. The familiar scent of old wood and paper filled the sterile air of the storage unit. I spent over an hour carefully going through each drawer. They were mostly filled with old stationery, dried-up fountain pens, and bundles of letters tied with faded silk ribbons, correspondence from friends and family over decades. It was a treasure trove for an archivist like me, but there was nothing about the ring. My heart sank. Maybe Teresa was wrong. Maybe I was just chasing ghosts. Finally, I remembered the secret compartment. Grandma B had called it her heart drawer. A small section of the wood paneling at the back of the knee hole looked solid, but if you pressed the corner of a decorative inlay just right, a small, hidden drawer would pop out. I reached under the desk, my fingers finding the familiar carved flower. I pressed. With a soft click, the drawer sprang open. It was tiny, barely big enough for a few items. Inside, nestled on a piece of worn velvet, were a pair of my grandfather's cufflinks and a small, folded piece of stationery. The paper was thick and creamy, my grandmother's favorite kind. Her elegant, looping script covered the page. It was dated a few months before she passed away. It wasn't a formal will or a legal document. It was a letter, and it was addressed to me. "My dearest Maria," it began. "If you are reading this, it means the time has come for you to know my heart on a matter I fear may be complicated by others. I am speaking of the Beaumont sapphire, our family ring. I am writing this down, as your Aunt Teresa would say, to make it permanent, to give my words a weight they might not have in memory alone. My breath caught in my throat. I continued reading, my eyes flying across the page. That ring is for you, my dear girl. I told you this when you were 16, and my feelings have only grown stronger since. You, Maria, are the historian of this family. You feel the pull of the past, you understand that an object like this is not about monetary worth or social status, but about the story it carries. Your sister, bless her heart, lives for the moment. She is a firefly, bright and beautiful, but she does not see the stars. You, my quiet stargazer, you see the whole constellation. The ring belongs with you. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the ink. This was it. This was proof. I worry about your mother, the letter went on. Helen sees the world in terms of presentation. She loves you both in her way, but she has always been dazzled by Sophia's sparkle. I fear she will be tempted to give the ring to Sophia, to use it as a centerpiece for a grand occasion. I am entrusting you with this letter as my final word on the matter. This is not just a wish, it is my direction. The Beaumont sapphire is your birthright, Maria. It belongs to the keeper of our stories. Let no one tell you otherwise. With all my love, your Grandma B. I sank to the floor of the cold storage unit, clutching the letter to my chest. The tears finally came, hot tears of grief and relief and a new, rising feeling, a cold, hard anger. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. It was a deliberate betrayal. My mother had known. She must have known my grandmother's wishes, but she had ignored them, choosing instead to stage a public spectacle that both humiliated me and dishonored her own mother's memory. The faded ink on that old piece of paper wasn't just a letter, it was a call to action. My grandmother had entrusted me with her legacy, and I would not let her down. Holding my grandmother's letter felt like holding a shield. The doubt and shame that had clouded my mind for a week were gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. My mother hadn't just made a mistake, she had made a choice. She had actively gone against her own mother's dying wish to fuel my sister's vanity and her own social ambitions. The public humiliation wasn't an unfortunate side effect, it was a calculated part of the performance. The anger that settled in my bones was cold and steady, the slow-burning fire of a historian who has just found an undeniable primary source document proving a long-suspected truth. But one letter, however powerful, might not be enough. My mother was an expert at spinning narratives. She could easily dismiss the letter as the ramblings of an old woman or claim she'd never seen it and had no knowledge of its contents. She would paint me as jealous and vindictive, trying to ruin Sophia's happiness. To confront her, I needed more than just one piece of evidence. I needed to build a case so solid, so irrefutable, that she would have no room to lie or manipulate her way out. As an archivist, I knew how to do this. I needed corroboration. My first call was to Great Aunt Teresa. I met her at her quiet, cozy condominium, which smelled of tea and old books, a miniature version of my grandmother's house. I handed her the letter without a word. She put on her reading glasses, her expression growing sterner with each line she read. When she finished, she took off the glasses and looked at me, her eyes sharp. "I knew it," she said, her voice firm. "Beatrice told me about this letter. She told me she was writing it and hiding it somewhere only you would think to look. She was so worried Helen would pull a stunt exactly like this." "She told you?" I asked, a fresh wave of validation washing over me. "Oh yes," Teresa said, nodding. "We talked about it several times in her final months. Your grandmother was no fool. She saw how Helen paraded Sophia around, and she worried the meaning of the ring would be lost. She wanted it to go to you, Maria. She was explicit." Teresa paused, her gaze distant. She also told me she left other clues. "Breadcrumbs for my little historian," she called them. Breadcrumbs? The word sparked a memory. When I was a child, Grandma B would create scavenger hunts for me in her big, old house. She'd leave little notes and riddles that would lead me through dusty rooms to a final prize, usually a vintage book or a historical postcard. Her attic was always the heart of these games. It was a sprawling, dusty wonderland of forgotten treasures. The house had been sold after she passed, but my mother had moved most of the attic's contents into the same storage facility where the desk was kept, just in a larger, less organized unit at the back of the complex. Helen had complained about the cost of storing all that junk, but she couldn't bring herself to throw away her mother's entire life. She'd promised to sort through it one day. That day had never come. Armed with the unit key and a renewed sense of purpose, I went back to the storage facility. Unit 2B was cavernous and cold. It was filled with dozens of cardboard boxes, all labeled in my grandmother's neat script. University papers, garden journals, photographs 1960-1980. It was a lifetime, packed away in cardboard. It was overwhelming, but the archivist in me took over. I began to work systematically, just as I would with a new collection at the city records office. I made a mental inventory, starting with the boxes that seemed most personal. I spent the entire weekend in that dusty unit. I found her old journals, filled with observations about her garden, notes on books she'd read, and reflections on her life. In a journal from the year before she died, I found the first breadcrumb. Tucked into a page describing the autumn crocuses blooming, she had written, "Spoke with Helen today about my wishes for the sapphire. She seemed to understand, but she has a selective memory when it comes to things that don't fit her plans. I must be more direct. Perhaps a note in my jewelry box is in order, a reminder for the future." My heart leaped. The jewelry box. It was a large, rosewood chest with multiple drawers, which my mother now kept on her own dresser. I had seen it there just a few months ago when I dropped off a birthday gift for her. The next breadcrumb was even more telling. In a box labeled Legal and Household, I found a folder of paperwork related to her estate. Tucked inside was an old inventory list of her valuable items, prepared for an insurance company years ago. Next to the entry for the 19th century sapphire and pearl ring, she had made a handwritten annotation in the margin. To be given to my granddaughter, Maria Elena Vance, upon her engagement or 30th birthday, whichever comes first. Below it, in a different, more recent ink, she had added, "Reiterated to Helen on May 10th. The date was from just 3 months before her death. This was more than a wish. This was a documented instruction. My mother hadn't just ignored a private letter. She had ignored a direct, recorded statement of intent. The selective memory my grandmother had mentioned was, in fact, deliberate erasure. The final piece of evidence was the most heartbreaking. In a box of old home videotapes, I found one labeled Maria's 16th birthday. I didn't have a VCR, so I took it to a local shop to have it digitized. When I got the file back and pressed play, I was transported back to that sunny afternoon in my grandmother's garden. And there it was. My grandmother, holding my hand, her voice soft but clear on the camera's microphone. "This ring belongs with someone who understands its story. One day, it will be yours." The promise. And standing in the background, partially obscured by a rose bush but clearly visible, was my mother. She was watching us. She had been there. She had heard the entire thing. The video was the final nail in the coffin of her plausible deniability. She hadn't just been told, she had been a witness to the original promise. For 16 years, she had known, and she had waited for the perfect moment to betray it. The echoes in that dusty attic had given me everything I needed. I had my grandmother's letter, her journal entry, her annotated inventory, Aunt Teresa's testimony, and now, video evidence of the promise itself. I wasn't just going to confront my mother. I was going to present her with a meticulously curated archive of her own deceit. With my evidence gathered, the raw, hot anger I'd felt began to cool into something far more dangerous, methodical resolve. A dramatic, tearful confrontation would get me nowhere. My mother and sister were masters of emotional manipulation. They would twist my words, paint me as hysterical, and turn the tables until I was the one apologizing. I couldn't beat them at their game, so I would make them play mine. My field of battle wouldn't be a shouting match in a living room. It would be a quiet, organized, and inescapable presentation of facts. The archivist in me was now in full control. My plan began to form, built around a single upcoming event, my mother's 61st birthday brunch. It was 2 weeks away. Every year, Helen hosted an intimate gathering for her closest friends and a few select family members at her impeccably designed home. It was her annual showcase, a display of her perfect life, her perfect taste, and her perfect family. This year, Sophia and her new fiancé, Julian, were to be the guests of honor. It was the ideal stage. The audience would be small but influential in my mother's social circle, people whose opinions she valued immensely. First, I needed to organize my evidence into a compelling narrative. I scanned the letter, the journal page, and the insurance inventory, creating high-quality digital copies. I isolated the audio from the videotape, cleaning it up so my grandmother's voice was crystal clear. I then took the short video clip of the promise and my mother's presence in the background and embedded it into a simple, elegant slideshow. The slideshow would be my primary tool. No theatrics, just a chronological presentation of the truth. My next step was to secure my one and only ally, Great-Aunt Teresa. I invited her for coffee and laid out my entire plan. She listened patiently, her eyes thoughtful behind her glasses. "It's a bold move, Maria," she said when I finished. "Confronting Helen in front of her friends, that's hitting her where she's most vulnerable, her image." "Her image is what she cares about most," I replied, my voice steady. "It's the reason she did this. She needs to understand that actions have consequence. CES, especially when they tarnish a memory as important as Grandma B.S. Teresa took a slow sip of her tea. "Your grandmother would be proud of your thoroughness. But are you prepared for the fallout? This will likely fracture your family permanently." "The fracture was already there," I said quietly. "They just covered it with pretty wallpaper. I'm just exposing the cracks in the foundation." A slow smile spread across her face. "All right then, my little historian, I'm in. What do you need me to do?" Teresa's role was crucial. She would be my witness, the living confirmation of my grandmother's intentions. Her presence would lend an unimpeachable air of gravitas to my claims. We agreed that she would arrive at the brunch with me. The final piece of my plan involved a bit of subtlety. 2 days before the brunch, I sent a group email to my mother, Sophia, and Julian. The subject line was innocuous, a question about Grandma's things. In the email, I wrote, "Hi everyone. While I was sorting through some of Grandma B's old boxes, I came across her journals and some paperwork related to her estate. There are a few things in here about her wishes for some of the family heirlooms that I found confusing, especially concerning the sapphire ring. I was hoping we could take a few minutes at the birthday brunch on Sunday to clear it up. I'd hate for there to be any misunderstanding about Grandma's final wishes. Love, Maria." It was the perfect bait. It was polite, non-accusatory, and framed me as someone seeking clarity. But I knew how they would read it. My mother would see it as a threat, a hint that I was planning to make a scene. Sophia would see it as a desperate, jealous attempt to spoil her happiness. Their natural arrogance would lead them to believe they could easily shut me down. They would prepare their defenses, but they would be preparing for a hysterical argument, not a methodical presentation of evidence. They were walking into a trap of their own making. The night before the brunch, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had rehearsed what I would say, timing it perfectly. My slideshow was loaded onto a small USB drive that fit in my pocket. My outfit was chosen, a simple, professional-looking charcoal gray dress. I would not look like a victim. I would look like an archivist presenting her findings. My grandmother had left me breadcrumbs, and I had followed them. I had pieced together the story she wanted told. Now, all that was left was to share it. The stage was set, the players were ready, and the curator of the exhibit, me, was about to open the doors. My mother wanted her birthday to be a celebration of the perfect image she had constructed. I was about to present her with a mirror showing the ugly truth behind it. The air in my mother's house was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and gourmet coffee. The brunch was, as always, a masterclass in casual elegance. About a dozen guests, my mother's closest friends, mingled in the sunlit living room, admiring the new abstract painting she'd hung over the fireplace. Sophia was the center of attention, her hand, and the sapphire ring, gesturing animatedly as she told a story about a brand collaboration. Julian stood beside her, looking every bit the proud fiancé. When Aunt Teresa and I arrived, my mother's smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. "Maria Teresa, so glad you could make it," she said, air-kissing us both. Her eyes darted to me, a silent warning in their depths. "Wouldn't miss it, Helen," Teresa replied warmly, giving no indication of the storm to come. We sat down to eat at the long, beautifully set dining table. The conversation was light, revolving around vacations, renovations, and Sophia's upcoming wedding. I ate little, my stomach a knot of nervous energy. I waited patiently, listening as my mother held court, accepting compliments on the food, the decor, her life. As the main course was cleared and dessert was served, my mother raised her glass. "I just want to thank you all for being here to celebrate with me," she began. "I feel so blessed to be surrounded by such wonderful friends and, of course, my beautiful family." Her eyes met mine again, this time with a glint of challenge. It was my opening. I took a deep breath. "That's so lovely, Mom," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the polite murmurs. "Speaking of family, I'm so glad we're all here together, because as I mentioned in my email, I did want to clear up something about Grandma B's legacy." A hush fell over the table. Sophia shot me a venomous look. My mother's smile became a thin, hard line. "Maria, darling, now is really not the time or the place." "Actually, I think it's the perfect time and place," I countered, keeping my voice even. "Because it's about honoring her memory, which I know is important to all of us." I turned to the guests. "I apologize for interrupting the celebration, but this will only take a moment. You see, there's been a misunderstanding about my grandmother's ring, the beautiful sapphire Sophia is now wearing." I pulled the small USB drive from my pocket and walked over to the large smart TV mounted on the wall, which my mother often used to display art. "Mom, you don't mind if I use this for a second, do you? I have something I think everyone needs to see." Before she could protest, I had plugged in the drive. Her face was a mixture of fury and shock. The TV screen flickered to life, showing a title card I had created. "The Last Will of Beatrice Beaumont, a Matter of Record." "What is this, Maria?" Sophia snapped, her voice high-pitched. "Are you trying to ruin Mom's birthday?" "I'm trying to present the truth, Sophia," I said, turning back to the table. "As an archivist, I believe in the importance of primary sources." The first slide appeared. It was a high-resolution scan of Grandma B's handwritten letter to me. I began to read it aloud, my voice clear and steady. "My dearest Maria, if you are reading this, it means the time has come for you to know my heart on a matter I fear may be complicated by others. I am speaking of the Beaumont sapphire. That ring is for you, my dear girl." The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My mother's face had gone pale. I clicked to the next slide, the journal entry. I read aloud, "Spoke with Helen today about my wishes for the sapphire. She seemed to understand, but she has a selective memory." My mother stood up. "That's enough, Maria. This is absurd. You've twisted the words of a sentimental old woman." "Am I?" I asked calmly and clicked again. The scanned image of the insurance inventory list filled the screen with the handwritten annotation clearly visible. "To be given to my granddaughter, Maria Elena Vance." I used the remote to zoom in on the date and the note below it, reiterated to Helen on May 10th. A collective gasp went through the room. The guests were no longer looking at me with pity, but at my mother with confusion and dawning disapproval. "And finally," I said, my voice softening, "for anyone who doubts the original promise." I clicked one last time. The video from my 16th birthday began to play. The audio was crisp. My grandmother's voice filled the silent room. "This ring belongs with someone who understands its story. One day, it will be yours." The camera panned slightly, and there, unmistakable in the background, was my mother, Helen, watching the entire exchange. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and damning. I turned to face my family. Sophia looked horrified, her hand instinctively covering the ring. Julian was staring at my mother, his expression unreadable. And my mother, she looked completely and utterly defeated. The mask of the perfect hostess had shattered, revealing the cold, calculating woman underneath. Aunt Teresa was the first to speak, her voice ringing with quiet authority. "I was there when Beatrice wrote that letter, Helen. She told me her wishes, and she told me she feared you would do exactly this. You didn't just ignore a wish. You defied your mother's will." My mother finally found her voice, but it was a weak, trembling whisper. I thought it would be better this way. Sophia's engagement was such a public event. The ring deserved a grand moment. The ring deserved to be with the person Grandma wanted to have it, I said, my voice devoid of anger, only a profound sadness. You didn't do it for the ring, you did it for yourself, for the image. You used our family's legacy as a prop, and you humiliated me to do it. But Grandma was smarter than you thought. She left a record. I looked at Sophia, who was now staring at the ring on her finger as if it were poison. It was never about you not deserving it, Sophia. It was about a promise she made to me. A promise Mom knew about all along. With that, I turned and walked toward the door. Aunt Teresa rose and followed me. As I left, I didn't look back, but I could feel the weight of every stare, the crumbling of my mother's carefully constructed world, and the heavy, satisfying silence of the truth finally brought to light. The drive back to my apartment with Aunt Teresa was quiet. The adrenaline from the confrontation slowly drained away, leaving behind a strange mix of exhaustion and peace. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't cried. I had simply presented the facts, letting my grandmother's words speak for themselves. I had honored her, and in doing so, I had finally honored myself. "You were remarkable, Maria," Teresa said as I pulled up to her building. "You had the strength of a librarian and the precision of an archivist. Your grandmother would have been so incredibly proud." Coming from her, those words meant everything. The fallout was both immediate and catastrophic, just as Teresa had predicted. One of my mother's friends, a woman who had also been close to my grandmother, called me that evening. "I am so sorry for what you went through, Maria," she said, her voice filled with genuine remorse. What Helen did was unforgivable. None of us knew. It turned out that after Teresa and I left, the party had disintegrated. The guests, horrified and embarrassed, had made their excuses and fled, leaving my mother and sister alone amidst the ruins of the perfect brunch. My mother tried to call me multiple times that night, and the next day, and the day after. I didn't answer. Her texts devolved from furious accusations, "How could you do this to me on my birthday?" to desperate pleas, "We need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding." I knew talking would be pointless. There was nothing left to misunderstand. The most surprising development came from Julian, Sophia's fiancé. He called me a week later. His tone was serious and respectful. "Maria," he said, "I wanted to apologize on behalf of myself and, well, my future family. I had no idea about any of this. What your mother and Sophia did was deeply wrong. It showed a side of them I hadn't seen before." He paused. "Sophia is a mess. She says she can't even look at the ring anymore. She's starting to realize this isn't just about a piece of jewelry. It's about the character of the family she's marrying into." I got the distinct impression that their on-brand relationship was now facing some serious off-screen turbulence. About a month after the brunch, a small, insured package arrived at my apartment. There was no return address, but I knew who it was from. Inside, nestled in a plain cardboard box, was the dark blue velvet box. My hands trembled as I opened it. There, resting on the faded lining, was the Beaumont sapphire. It looked smaller, more delicate, than it had on Sophia's hand. It looked like it belonged. There was a note inside, written on plain paper in Sophia's looping, girly script. It was short and to the point. "I'm sorry. Mom was wrong. You were right. I can't wear this." That was it. No excuses, no justifications. For the first time in her life, Sophia had been confronted with a truth she couldn't filter, rebrand, or ignore. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. It felt like coming home. It wasn't a trophy from a battle one. It was a connection, a quiet and profound link to the woman who had seen me for who I was. I have not spoken to my mother or sister since that day. The silence between us is vast and, I suspect, permanent. I hear through Aunt Teresa that my mother has become something of a recluse, her social circle shattered by the public revelation of her deceit. Sophia and Julian are still together, but their wedding plans are on hold. Apparently, the incident forced them to have some very real conversations about honesty and family values. For my part, my life has become richer and more peaceful than ever. The ring on my finger is a constant reminder not of the battle I fought, but of the legacy I am here to protect. My grandmother's real heirloom wasn't the ring itself. It was her wisdom, her integrity, and her belief in the power of truth. The letter, the journals, the video, those were the true jewels she left me. The ring was just the beautiful box that held them all. My work as an archivist is no longer just a job. It feels like a calling. I preserve stories. I protect the truth from being rewritten by those who value image over substance. And every time I look down at the twilight blue sapphire on my hand, I know with absolute certainty that I am exactly where I am supposed to be, carrying on the story, just as my grandmother knew I would.